The bikers thought they'd found an easy target when they spotted the lone woman sitting in Joe's Roadhouse diner that rainy Thursday night. They had no idea she was Emily Walker, a Force Recon Marine with years of combat experience. Their mistake would become the biggest regret of their lives. The late September rain drummed steadily against the windows of Joe's Roadhouse diner, a well-worn establishment just off Route 83 outside Lancaster. The clock above the counter read 9:45 p.m., and the dinner rush had dwindled to just a handful of regulars scattered among the red vinyl booths. Classic rock played softly from aged speakers, mixing with the gentle clink of coffee cups and the sizzle of the grill. Emily Walker sat in her usual corner booth, the one that gave her a clear view of both exits and the entire dining room, a habit ingrained from 8 years in the Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance. At 35, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from multiple combat deployments. Though most patrons just saw a lean woman in jeans and a gray Henley, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. The dog tags beneath her shirt rested cool against her skin, a constant reminder of who she was and what she'd been through. Rachel Thompson, a waitress in her late 20s, approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "Need a refill, Em?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Emily had been coming to Joe's every Thursday for the past year, since moving back to her hometown after her service. The routine helped with the transition to civilian life, giving her a sense of normalcy she sometimes struggled to find. "Thanks, Rachel," Emily smiled, sliding her cup forward. The sleeve of her Henley pulled up slightly, revealing a small portion of the tattoo that wrapped around her forearm. The Marine Corps emblem interwoven with elements from her Force Recon unit. She'd earned that tattoo alongside her unit after their second deployment, a memory that felt both recent and distant. The smell of coffee mixed with the aroma of grilled burgers reminded her of late-night meals during training exercises, though the comfort of the diner was a far cry from field rations. Behind the counter, Kate Sullivan wiped down the coffee machine while Marcus Carter, the night manager, checked inventory. David Martinez's voice carried from the kitchen as he sang along to the Beatles' song playing overhead, the smell of his famous apple pie filling the diner. The regular Thursday night crew had become something of a family to Emily over the past year, helping her adjust to civilian life more than they probably realized. They never pushed her to talk about her service, but they were always there with a friendly smile and warm conversation when she needed it. The diner itself was a slice of small-town America, with its checkerboard floor tiles and vintage Route 83 road signs decorating the walls. Photographs of local high school football teams dating back to the 1970s lined one wall, while the other featured signed pictures from the occasional celebrity who'd stopped by over the decades. The place had character, earned through years of serving travelers and locals alike. A small American flag stood in the corner, slightly faded but proudly displayed, next to a newer Marine Corps flag that Marcus had put up after learning about Emily's service. Emily sipped her coffee, her mind drifting to the training session she had planned for tomorrow. Since leaving the Marines, she'd started teaching self-defense classes at the local community center, focusing especially on women and teenagers. It gave her purpose, a way to use her skills to help others. Tomorrow's class would cover situational awareness, something her years in Force Recon had taught her could make the difference between life and death. She'd already prepared the lesson plan, drawing from both her military experience and civilian applications. The peaceful evening atmosphere was broken by the distant rumble of motorcycles, growing louder as they approached the diner. Emily's trained ears picked up the sound of multiple bikes, and something in their aggressive revving made her instincts stir. She took another sip of coffee, her eyes moving to the large windows facing the parking lot. Rachel glanced up from wiping down a nearby table, her expression shifting slightly at the sound. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched as several Harley-Davidsons pulled into the lot, their headlights cutting through the darkness and casting long shadows across the wet pavement. The riders were big men, dressed in leather vests covered in patches that Emily didn't recognize from any of the legitimate riding clubs she knew from her military friends. The bikes parked directly in front of the entrance, and Emily watched as the men dismounted, their boots splashing in puddles as they swaggered toward the diner's door. Their body language spoke of aggression and arrogance, a combination she'd seen lead to trouble many times before. The bell above the entrance chimed as they entered, bringing with them the smell of wet leather and exhaust. The leader, a tall man with a graying beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, scanned the diner with predatory eyes. His companions flanked him like soldiers falling into formation, their movements suggesting a hierarchy Emily recognized from her military days. Their boots left wet tracks on the freshly mopped floor, marking their path like breadcrumbs. Rachel's smile faltered slightly as the men made their way to the counter, their wet boots squeaking against the linoleum floor. Emily remained still, watching their reflection in the window beside her booth, noting how their hands kept straying to their vests, how they positioned themselves to watch the exits. Her years of training had taught her to read people, to spot the signs of those looking for trouble. Every movement, every gesture told a story, and this one was starting to read like a cautionary tale. She couldn't have known then that these men were about to learn a harsh lesson about judging books by their covers, or that this quiet evening at Joe's Roadhouse diner was about to become anything but routine. The rain continued to fall outside, providing a steady backdrop to what would soon become a night none of them would ever forget. The bikers settled at the counter, their wet leather creaking as they arranged themselves on the chrome stools. The leader, who would later identify himself as Snake Jackson, placed his heavy hands on the counter, fingers adorned with thick silver rings tapping impatiently. His eyes followed Rachel as she moved behind the counter, a predatory gaze that made Emily's jaw tighten. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" Rachel asked, her voice professional but guarded. Emily noticed how she maintained a careful distance from the counter, her body language showing subtle signs of discomfort that most wouldn't catch. "Coffee, sweetheart. Black as my soul," Snake growled, earning chuckles from his companions. "Pete, Doug, you boys hungry?" The two other bikers nodded, their eyes roaming the diner with an unsettling intensity. Kate Sullivan had stopped wiping the coffee machine, her hands gripping the cloth a little too tightly. Marcus Carter emerged from the back office, his manager's instincts clearly sensing the shift in atmosphere. He positioned himself near the register, pretending to organize receipts while keeping the new customers in his peripheral vision. Emily took another sip of her coffee, using the motion to scan the men more thoroughly. The one called Pete, wearing a bandana, had a distinctive scar on his chin and carried himself with barely contained aggression. Doug, the third biker, was the largest of the three, his long hair tied back revealing a neck covered in crude tattoos. All three wore vests bearing patches she now recognized from police bulletins, warnings about a motorcycle gang involved in various criminal activities across state lines. "Anything else catch your eye?" Snake asked Rachel, his tone making it clear he wasn't talking about the menu. Pete laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the diner's usual peaceful ambiance. Doug's massive frame shifted on his stool, deliberately crowding Rachel's space as she tried to pour their coffee. The few remaining regular customers began to sense the tension. An elderly couple in a booth near the door quietly asked for their check, while a truck driver at the far end of the counter suddenly became very interested in finishing his pie. David Martinez had stopped singing in the kitchen, the silence from the grill area speaking volumes. Emily watched as Rachel handled the situation with remarkable composure, though she could see the slight tremor in the waitress's hands as she set down the coffee cups. The young woman had mentioned taking a self-defense class at the community center where Emily taught, but facing three intimidating men was different from practicing in a controlled environment. "Hey, sugar," Pete called out to Kate, who was trying to busy herself with cleaning tables. "Why don't you come over here and keep us company?" His scarred face split into what he probably thought was a charming smile, but came across as more of a leer. Marcus stepped forward, his voice firm but professional. "Gentlemen, our staff is here to serve food and drinks. Let's keep things respectful." It was the right thing to say, but Emily could tell from the way Snake's shoulders tensed that it was about to make things worse. Snake turned slowly on his stool, sizing up Marcus. "Respectful? We're just being friendly, aren't we, boys?" His companions murmured in agreement, their body language becoming more aggressive. Maybe you should mind your own business and let the ladies decide if they want to be friendly back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily set down her coffee cup, the soft clink drawing a quick glance from Doug. She saw recognition flicker in his eyes as he noticed her military bearing, but he quickly dismissed her, turning back to watch his leader's confrontation with Marcus. It was a common mistake, underestimating her because of her gender, her size, her apparent solitude. The rain outside had intensified, drums against the windows creating an ominous backdrop to the growing tension. Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the parking lot where the bikers' motorcycles gleamed wetly in the darkness. The diner's fluorescent lights seemed to grow harsher, casting sharp shadows across the scene. Rachel moved to serve coffee to another table, but Snake's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "We're not finished talking, darling." His grip wasn't quite tight enough to leave marks, but the threat was clear. Emily's muscles tensed, years of combat training coursing through her body like electricity. Marcus took another step forward, but Emily could see he was out of his depth. The manager was brave, but he wasn't trained for this kind of situation. Kate had backed away toward the kitchen, her face pale, while David watched through the service window, his hand likely already on the phone. The elderly couple hurriedly left cash on their table and made their way to the door, the bell chiming their exit. The truck driver remained, his broad shoulders tense, clearly wrestling with whether to intervene. Emily appreciated his concern, but hoped he'd stay out of what was coming. She'd seen that look in Snake's eyes before, in other parts of the world, the look of a man about to make a serious mistake. Rachel's voice wavered slightly as she spoke. "Sir, please let go of my arm." The fear in her tone was the final straw for Emily. She'd heard that same fear too many times during her deployments, seen too many people terrorized by those who thought their strength gave them power over others. As Snake's grip tightened on Rachel's wrist, Emily knew the situation had reached its tipping point. The next few moments would determine how this night would end, and she had already decided it wouldn't end with these men thinking they could intimidate innocent people without consequences. Emily Walker didn't immediately move from her booth. Years of combat experience had taught her the value of timing, of letting a situation develop until you had the clearest advantage. She watched as Snake's fingers flexed around Rachel's wrist, noticed how Pete and Doug had shifted their positions to face the room, their bodies telegraphing preparation for violence. "Come on, sweetheart," Snake purred, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Why don't you take your break now? We could show you our bikes." Rachel tried to pull away again, but his grip remained firm. Marcus Carter took another hesitant step forward, clearly struggling with how to handle the escalating situation. The truck driver at the far end of the counter had given up any pretense of eating his pie. His right hand had disappeared beneath his jacket, and Emily suspected he was carrying, another variable to consider. Kate Sullivan had pressed herself against the back counter, her hand gripping a coffee pot like a weapon. In the kitchen, David Martinez had stopped all pretense of cooking, his dark eyes fixed on the scene through the service window. Emily began a mental inventory, her training kicking in automatically. 3 hostile subjects, 2 with probable weapons based on the bulges under their vests. Pete's boots showed the outline of what was likely a knife, while Doug's jacket pockets sagged with the weight of something heavy. Brass knuckles, if she had to guess. The leader, Snake, had positioned himself with his back partially to her, a mistake she'd seen too many times from overconfident opponents. "I said let go." Rachel's voice was stronger now, anger beginning to overcome fear. Snake's response was to pull her closer, causing her to stumble slightly against the counter. The move shifted his balance, creating an opening that Emily filed away for later use. "You heard the lady," Marcus said, his voice wavering slightly but determined. "I'm going to have to ask you all to leave." He reached for the phone behind the counter, but Doug's massive hand slammed down over it. "No calls," Doug growled, his voice deep and threatening. "Put the phone down and step back, friend." The last word dripped with sarcasm as he rose to his full height, towering over the counter. Emily noticed how Pete's hand kept straying to his right boot, confirming her suspicion about the knife. His eyes darted between Marcus and the exits, showing signs of increasing agitation. That made him potentially the most dangerous. Men who were both nervous and trying to prove themselves often acted unpredictably. The rain continued its steady drumming against the windows, punctuated now by occasional thunder. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the parking lot where their bikes gleamed wetly. Emily used the reflections in the windows to study the men's positions without turning her head. Force Recon had taught her how to gather intelligence while appearing completely uninterested. "Look what you did now," Snake said to Marcus, his tone mockingly disappointed. "You've gone and made my friend upset. That's not very good customer service, is it?" He pulled Rachel even closer, causing her to gasp. "Maybe we need to have a word with the management about how to treat paying customers." Emily watched as Pete slid off his stool, moving to flank Marcus, while Doug maintained his position blocking the phone. Their movements were coordinated, not military-trained but experienced in working together. They'd done this before, probably multiple times at other establishments, but they'd never done it in front of a Force Recon Marine. Kate had begun edging toward the kitchen door, but Pete noticed the movement. "Stay right there, honey," he called out, his scarred face twisting into an ugly smile. "We're all going to have a nice friendly conversation about hospitality." Through the kitchen window, Emily could see David had managed to slip his phone from his pocket. Good. Local law enforcement should be notified, even though she doubted she'd need their help. Still, it was better to have backup on the way. Another lesson learned from her military days. The truck driver had slowly risen from his seat, his hand still inside his jacket. Emily caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Adding an armed civilian to the mix, however well-intentioned, would only complicate the situation. To her relief, he seemed to understand, though he remained standing, ready to help if needed. Snake's grip on Rachel's wrist had begun to leave marks. Emily noted how the waitress's free hand had curled into a fist. She remembered teaching that same defensive instinct in her self-defense classes. But Rachel wasn't ready for this kind of confrontation, not against 3 experienced aggressors. The next few moments would be crucial. Emily began counting exits, angles, potential weapons. The coffee pot in Kate's hands could be useful. The metal napkin dispensers on the counter could become improvised projectiles. The narrow space behind the counter would work to her advantage, limiting their ability to maneuver. Thunder rolled overhead as Emily finally set down her coffee cup, the sound drawing Pete's attention briefly. She saw recognition flash in his eyes again as he noticed her calm demeanor, her controlled breathing, her practiced stillness. This time, he didn't dismiss her so quickly. She saw him lean over to Doug, murmuring something that made the larger man glance her way. Too late, they were starting to sense something was different about the lone woman in the corner booth. But they still didn't understand just how badly they had miscalculated. Emily allowed herself a small, quiet smile. These men were about to learn that their biggest mistake wasn't threatening the diner's staff. It was failing to recognize a predator far more dangerous than themselves. The atmosphere in Joe's Roadhouse diner had shifted from tense to explosive. Snake's fingers dug deeper into Rachel's wrist as he pulled her closer, his breath reeking of alcohol and stale cigarettes. "Maybe we should take this conversation somewhere more private," he sneered, causing Rachel to struggle against his grip with renewed panic. Emily silently slid out of her booth, her movements fluid and deliberate. 8 years of Force Recon training had taught her to move like a shadow when needed. Pete noticed first, his scarred face turning toward her with mild curiosity, that quickly shifted to something more calculating as he registered her confident stance. "Mind your own business, lady," Pete warned, his hand straying to his boot where Emily had already identified the hidden knife. "This doesn't concern you." But his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Something about her deliberate movements had triggered his survival instincts, even if he didn't understand why. "Actually," Emily said, her voice calm and measured, "it does." She took another step forward, positioning herself at an angle that gave her clear lines of attack to all three men. "You're going to let go of Rachel's arm now." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed in life or death situations. Snake turned his head to look at her, his eyes narrowing as he took in her athletic build and confident posture. "Well, well," he chuckled, though his grip on Rachel loosened slightly. "Looks like we've got ourselves a hero." Doug shifted his weight, moving away from the phone to better face this new threat, while Pete's fingers twitched closer to his boot. "No heroes here," Emily replied evenly. "Just someone who's giving you a chance to walk away before you make an even bigger mistake." Her words carried the weight of experience, of someone who had seen how quickly situations like this could turn ugly. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the diner in stark white light for a moment. In that flash, Emily caught sight of something that confirmed her earlier suspicions, the outline of a handgun beneath Snake's vest. The stakes had just gotten higher, but her expression remained unchanged. "You hear that, boys?" Snake's laugh was forced now, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. "Little lady thinks we're making a mistake." He turned more fully toward Emily, finally releasing Rachel's wrist. The waitress immediately backed away, rubbing her arm where angry red marks were already forming. Doug took a menacing step forward, his massive frame meant to intimidate. "Why don't you go back to your coffee, girl, before someone gets hurt?" The threat in his voice was clear, but Emily didn't budge. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, centering her balance in preparation for what might come next. Marcus had used this distraction to edge closer to the phone again, but Pete noticed. "Don't even think about it," he snarled, taking an aggressive step toward the manager. That movement brought him within Emily's calculated strike zone, another mistake she filed away for when the time came. "Last chance," Emily announced, her voice carrying across the now silent diner. Even the rain seemed to have quieted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. "Walk out now, get on your bikes, and we can all forget this happened." Snake's face darkened with rage. No one had noticed how Emily had methodically maneuvered them all into position, like pieces on a chessboard. "Or what?" he demanded, his hand moving toward his vest. "You gonna stop us? All three of us?" "Yes," Emily replied simply, the single word carrying absolute certainty. Her eyes tracked every minute movement, every shift in weight, every telegraphed intention. The truck driver had once again reached inside his jacket, but Emily gave him another subtle headshake. This was her fight now. Kate still gripped the coffee pot, her knuckles white. David watched intently through the kitchen window, his phone now visibly in his hand. Rachel had backed away to the far end of the counter, her expression a mix of fear and growing hope as she watched Emily stand her ground. "You know what?" Snake's voice had turned deadly quiet. "I think it's time we taught someone some manners." He nodded to his companions, and both men began to move, attempting to flank Emily. They still thought they had the advantage of numbers, still didn't understand what they were facing. Emily remained perfectly still, only her eyes moving as she tracked their positions. She recognized their pattern. It was the same way they'd probably intimidated countless others before, but they'd never tried it on someone who had conducted combat operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Thunder rolled overhead as tension reached its breaking point. Pete's hand had moved to his boot, Doug's fingers flexed in preparation for violence, and Snake's sneer had turned into something ugly and determined. The next few seconds would determine everything, and Emily knew exactly how they would play out. "Boys," she said softly, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes only from real combat experience. "You really should have taken the chance to walk away." Because now she could see in their eyes that they'd committed to violence, and that meant she no longer had to hold back. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. Pete moved first, exactly as Emily had predicted, his hand dropping to his boot for the knife. It was the opening she'd been waiting for. Before his fingers could close around the handle, her coffee cup sailed through the air, striking his hand with precision born from countless training exercises. He yelped in surprise and pain, stumbling backward. Snake's eyes widened at the speed of her movement, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed weapon under his vest. But Emily was already in motion, her years of Force Recon training transforming her into a blur of controlled violence. She crossed the distance between them in 2 fluid steps, her left hand striking his wrist with a precise blade hand strike, while her right delivered a lightning-fast palm heel to his solar plexus. The impact drove the air from Snake's lungs, causing him to double over. Before he could recover, Emily's knee connected with his descending face, sending him sprawling backward into the counter. The gun he'd been reaching for clattered to the floor, sliding away harmlessly under a booth. Doug roared in rage, charging forward like a freight train. His massive arms reached for Emily, but she was no longer where he expected. Years of close-quarters combat training took over as she stepped inside his guard, using his own momentum against him. Her elbow found his floating ribs while her foot swept his leg, sending the giant man crashing into a table. Pete had recovered his balance and finally managed to pull the knife, its blade glinting in the diner's fluorescent lights. "You're dead," he snarled, but his voice shook slightly. He'd never faced someone who moved like this, someone who read his attacks before he made them. Emily shifted her stance slightly, presenting a smaller target. "That's not your best option," she advised calmly, as if she were instructing one of her self-defense classes. When he lunged forward with the knife, she moved like water, redirecting his strike with a forearm block before capturing his wrist in a joint lock she'd perfected in combat. The knife clattered to the floor as Pete's wrist bent at an angle nature never intended. He screamed in pain, dropping to his knees. Emily maintained the hold, applying just enough pressure to keep him immobilized without causing permanent damage. Snake had managed to regain his feet, blood streaming from his nose. His eyes darted to his fallen gun, but Emily's voice stopped him. "Don't," she warned, her tone carrying the weight of someone who had dealt with far more dangerous men in far more dangerous places. "You really don't want to make this worse." Doug was struggling to rise from the wreckage of the table, his breath coming in pained gasps. The strike to his ribs had done its work, limiting his mobility. Emily kept him in her peripheral vision while maintaining the joint lock on Pete, her position carefully chosen to keep all 3 men in view. The entire sequence had taken less than 30 seconds. Rachel stood frozen behind the counter, her mouth open in shock. Kate still gripped the coffee pot like a weapon, though her white-knuckled grip had loosened slightly. Marcus Carter stood by the phone, which he'd finally managed to reach, though he seemed unsure if he still needed to call for help. "Now," Emily said, her breathing barely elevated. "Here's what's going to happen. David has already called the police." She nodded toward the kitchen where the cook still held his phone, having recorded the entire incident. "They'll be here soon. You can either wait quietly and explain to them why you came in here to harass innocent people, or—" She applied slightly more pressure to Pete's wrist, causing him to whimper. "Or you can get on your bikes and ride away, far away, and never come back to this diner or this town again." Her voice carried absolute certainty. "But before you decide, know that I've memorized your faces, your tattoos, and your bike registrations. If I ever hear about you causing trouble anywhere near here again, what just happened will feel like a warm-up." Thunder rolled outside, punctuating her words. Snake looked at his companions. Doug still struggling to breathe, Pete whimpering on his knees and seemed to deflate. The predatory gleam in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Fear. For the first time, he was the prey, and he knew it. "Okay," he said, raising his hands. "Okay. We're going. Just let him go." He gestured to Pete, who looked about ready to pass out from the pain and fear. Emily studied them for a moment longer, reading their body language, confirming their submission was genuine. Then she released Pete's wrist with a warning. "Remember what I said. Never again." Pete scrambled away, clutching his wrist. Doug had finally managed to stand, one arm wrapped protectively around his ribs. They began backing toward the door, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Snake reached down to retrieve his gun, but Emily's voice cracked like a whip. "Leave it." The bell above the door chimed 3 times as the bikers fled into the rainy night. The sound of their motorcycles starting up and roaring away carried through the windows, growing fainter until only the sound of rain remained. Emily turned to Rachel, her voice softening. "Are you all right?" The waitress nodded, still staring in amazement. The truck driver had finally removed his hand from his jacket, shaking his head in admiration. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "that was something else." The aftermath of the confrontation settled over Joe's Roadhouse diner like a heavy blanket. Emily methodically checked each person: Rachel's bruised wrist, Kate's trembling hands, Marcus's shocked expression. The manager had finally picked up the phone, but his fingers hovered over the keypad uncertainly. "You should still call," Emily advised, her voice steady and professional. "They left a weapon behind." She gestured to Snake's abandoned gun, still lying under the booth where it had slid. "And we'll need to document Rachel's injury." Her military training had taught her the importance of proper procedures, even after the immediate threat had passed. David emerged from the kitchen, his phone still recording. "I got everything," he announced, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by serious concern. From the moment they walked in until they ran out, clear footage of them grabbing Rachel, threatening everyone, and pulling weapons. He looked at Emily with newfound respect. "And every move you made." The truck driver had walked over to the overturned table, starting to write it. "Never seen anything like that," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "Served 20 years in the Army myself, but you moved like something else entirely." He extended his hand to Emily. "Jim Cooper, retired Master Sergeant." Emily shook his hand, recognizing the familiar calluses of a career soldier. "Force Recon," she said simply. Understanding passed between them, the kind that only comes from those who've served. "Thank you for staying ready to help, but also for holding back when I signaled." Rachel had come around the counter, still rubbing her wrist, but looking at Emily with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "That self-defense class you teach," she said slowly, "I don't think it covers moves like that." A small smile played at her lips, the first since the bikers had entered. "No," Emily admitted, returning the smile. "That was specialized training. But speaking of class, you did well. You stayed calm, tried to de-escalate, and when that didn't work, you created distance. Those are exactly the principles we teach." She gently examined Rachel's wrist. "You should still get this checked out, though. Document everything." Marcus had finally made the call, his voice becoming steadier as he reported the incident to the police. Kate had set down the coffee pot and was now brewing a fresh batch, her hands less shaky as the adrenaline began to wear off. The familiar routine seemed to help her regain her composure. "They were going to rob us, weren't they?" David asked, reviewing the footage on his phone. "The way they positioned themselves, how they tried to stop us from calling for help." His voice trailed off as he realized how badly things could have gone. Emily nodded grimly. "Most likely. Their patches matched a gang known for hitting small businesses in isolated areas. They target places with mostly female staff, use intimidation tactics, then escalate to robbery. Sometimes worse." Her jaw tightened at the last words, remembering intelligence briefings about similar groups she'd dealt with overseas. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the rain. Emily moved to the booth where Snake's gun had fallen, pulling a handkerchief from her pocket. "Don't touch this," she advised Marcus, who had started to reach for it. "Let the police handle it, but make sure they know it belongs to the one calling himself Snake, the leader with the gray beard." 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot, their emergency lights painting the rain-slicked windows in alternating red and blue. As officers entered the diner, Emily noticed how they immediately registered the overturned table, the scattered coffee cup, the weapon under the booth. Their hands stayed near their service weapons until Marcus quickly explained the situation. "Ma'am," one officer addressed Emily, recognizing something in her bearing. "Military?" When she nodded, he continued, "We're going to need your statement. But first, are you carrying?" It was a professional courtesy, one service member to another. "No," Emily replied. "Didn't need to be." The officer's lip twitched in what might have been a smile as he took in the scene again. His partner was already taking photographs of Rachel's wrist and the disturbed areas of the diner, building their case methodically. Jim Cooper stepped forward, introducing himself to the officers. "I witnessed everything," he said, "and the cook has video evidence. These men came in looking for trouble and found more than they bargained for." He gestured respectfully toward Emily. "This lady saved everyone here without even drawing blood, though they deserved worse." The bell above the door chimed again as two more officers entered, these ones in plainclothes. Detective Lisa Kennedy introduced herself, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene. "We've been tracking this gang," she said, examining Snake's abandoned gun with gloved hands. "They've hit 3 other diners in the past month, but they've never left evidence behind before." Emily provided her statement efficiently, years of mission debriefings making her account clear and precise. She included every detail that might help law enforcement track the gang: descriptions, tattoos, the way they worked as a unit. The detective's eyes widened slightly when Emily mentioned Force Recon, understanding dawning about how one woman had managed to handle 3 armed men. "Looks like they finally picked the wrong target," Detective Kennedy remarked, closing her notebook. She looked around the diner, at the staff who were already starting to recover their composure, at the evidence being carefully catalogued. "Something tells me we won't be seeing them in this town again." As the police finished processing the scene at Joe's Roadhouse diner, Emily sat at the counter watching Rachel give her official statement to Detective Kennedy. The young waitress's voice grew stronger as she recounted the events, her initial fear replaced by righteous anger as she described how the bikers had threatened everyone. "They knew exactly what they were doing," Rachel explained, her wrist now wrapped in a light bandage by the responding EMTs. "The way they spread out, how they tried to block the phones. It was like they'd done this before." She glanced at Emily, drawing confidence from her presence. "If Emily hadn't been here..." Detective Kennedy nodded, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. "They had done it before. We've got reports from 3 other diners across the state. Same MO, isolated locations, late hours, mostly female staff. But this is the first time they've left evidence behind." She carefully sealed Snake's gun into an evidence bag. "And the first time we've had clear video footage." David had transferred his recording to a police laptop, the footage already being analyzed by their technical team. "Perfect angle," the tech commented, reviewing the sequence of Emily's intervention. "You can see everything, the threats, the weapons, the assault on Rachel. And then..." He whistled softly as he watched Emily's precise takedown of the 3 men. Marcus was speaking with another officer, providing details about previous suspicious customers. "Now that I think about it," he said, "we had some other bikers in here last week. Just watching the place, didn't order much. Might have been them scouting us out." He handed over the security footage from those days as well. Kate had finally returned to her normal routine, though she stayed closer to Emily than before. "I've worked here 5 years," she said, pouring coffee for the officers. "Never felt unsafe until tonight, but watching how you handled them..." She shook her head in amazement. "Maybe I should sign up for your self-defense class." Emily smiled encouragingly. "You should. All of you should." She looked at the diner staff thoughtfully. "In fact, I could offer a special class just for restaurant workers. Focus on the specific situations you might face." The idea had been forming in her mind since the incident, a way to help prevent similar situations in the future. Jim Cooper, the truck driver, had stayed to give his statement as well. 20 years in the Army," he told one of the officers, "and I've never seen someone control a situation so completely. 3 armed men, and she didn't even have to throw a full punch, just pure skill and control." Detective Kennedy returned to Emily with additional questions about the gang's patches and tattoos. "You said you recognized some of their insignias. We've been trying to connect them to a larger organization operating along the East Coast." Emily described the specific markings she'd noticed, her memory enhanced by years of intelligence training. The main patch on their vests, a skull with crossed chains, matches reports I've seen about a group called the Iron Reapers. They started in New Jersey, moved down the coast hitting small businesses. Local law enforcement has had trouble catching them because they never stay in one area too long. The detective's eyebrows raised. That matches our intelligence exactly. The Iron Reapers have been on our radar for months, but we've never been able to get solid evidence until now. She gestured to the collection of evidence bags, the gun, photos of Rachel's injuries, David's video footage. This might be exactly what we need to bring down their whole operation. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease, though lightning still flickered occasionally in the distance. Through the windows, Emily could see additional police cars arriving, their lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Word had spread about the incident, and senior officers wanted to see the scene for themselves. "We'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow," Detective Kennedy told Emily. "Give a formal statement. Help us identify these men from our database. With your military background, your testimony will carry significant weight." Rachel overheard this and stepped closer. "I want to help too," she said firmly. "I'll testify about what they did, help identify them, maybe stop them from doing this to someone else." The fear in her eyes had been replaced by determination. Marcus gathered his staff together, his manager's instincts kicking in despite the disrupted evening. "We'll need to review our security procedures," he said. "Better cameras, panic buttons under the counter. Maybe change our late-night staffing policies." He looked at Emily gratefully. "Would you be willing to consult with us on that?" Before Emily could respond, David called out from the kitchen window. "Hey, you all need to see this." He had his phone out again, this time showing a local news website. The headline read, "Biker, Gang, Members Flee. Local Diner After Confrontation with Female Veteran." Below was a blurry image captured from the parking lot security camera, showing the three men rushing to their motorcycles. "That was fast," Kate commented, reading over David's shoulder. "Says here they're asking anyone with information about similar incidents to come forward?" She looked at Emily. "Guess you're going to be famous." Emily shook her head, uncomfortable with the attention. "The important thing is they were stopped, and now law enforcement has what they need to track them down." She turned to Detective Kennedy. "The Iron Reapers will probably try to leave the state quickly after this. You might want to coordinate with departments in neighboring states, set up checkpoints." The detective was already on her phone, making exactly those arrangements. The night's events had set in motion a chain of investigations that would have far-reaching consequences for the criminal organization. And it had all started because three bikers had made the mistake of threatening the wrong woman in a small-town diner. The following morning, Joe's Roadhouse diner hummed with an energy unlike anything in its decades-long history. News of the previous night's events had spread through the small town like wildfire, and by breakfast time, every booth was filled with curious locals eager to hear the story firsthand from those who were there. Rachel moved between tables with renewed confidence, her bandaged wrist now a badge of courage rather than a mark of victimization. "No, I'm fine, really," she assured concerned regular customers. "You should have seen Emily. She moved like something out of an action movie, except this was real." Her eyes lit up every time she recounted the story, each telling making her stronger. Marcus had arrived early to install new security cameras, their presence obvious but reassuring. "The security company's coming next week to put in the panic buttons," he told Emily, who sat at her usual booth drinking coffee. "And we're changing our late-night staffing policies. No one works alone anymore." The local newspaper had run the story on their front page. "Former Force Recon Marine thwarts biker gang attack." The article included a grainy security camera photo of the bikers fleeing into the night, along with a respectful mention of Emily's military service. She'd declined to be photographed or interviewed, preferring to stay out of the spotlight. "You're famous now," Kate teased, sliding a fresh cup of coffee in front of Emily. Her hands were steady today, her smile genuine. "I've already had 3 people ask me to sign up for your self-defense classes. Think you can handle a few more students?" Emily nodded, warming her hands around the coffee cup. "Already working on expanding the program. The community centers offered their larger room for evening classes." She paused, considering. Though what happened last night, that was different. That was military training, not basic self-defense. David stuck his head out from the kitchen, waving his phone. Just got word from Detective Kennedy. They've identified all 3 guys from my video. Snake's real name is Jackson Thorne. He's got warrants in 4 states. The other 2 are known associates of the Iron Reapers. He grinned proudly. My footage is being shared with departments up and down the coast. The bell above the door chimed as Jim Cooper, the truck driver from the previous night, walked in. He delayed his delivery schedule to give a fuller statement to the police this morning. Ma'am. He nodded respectfully to Emily as he took a seat at the counter. Word spreading through the trucking community. Iron Reapers have been hitting places like this all over, but now everyone knows they're not invincible. Rachel brought Jim his coffee without being asked, her movements more assured than before. Emily's agreed to teach us some basic defensive techniques, she told him. Nothing like what she did last night, but enough to help us feel safer. She touched her bandaged wrist thoughtfully. Enough to maybe help someone else if this happens again. The diner's phone had been ringing steadily all morning. Other restaurant owners in the area were calling for advice on security measures. Marcus kept a notepad by the phone, building a list of establishments interested in Emily's offered training sessions. The incident had awakened the community to the importance of preparedness. Channel 5 wants to do an interview, Kate mentioned, showing Emily a message on her phone. They're running a piece on business security and female empowerment. Detective Kennedy thinks it might help other victims come forward. She studied Emily's expression, but I'm guessing that's not your style. Emily shook her head, a small smile playing at her lips. My job in Force Recon was to complete the mission, not seek recognition. This is no different. She gestured around the diner. What matters is that places like this stay safe, that people like Rachel can work without fear. Outside, a police car pulled into the parking lot. Detective Kennedy stepped out, carrying a thick folder under her arm. She'd been working through the night, connecting dots between various reports of Iron Reapers activity. The bell chimed as she entered, heading straight for Emily's booth. We've got them, she announced, spreading photos across the table. Your descriptions helped us identify key members of their organization. State police are setting up checkpoints, and the FBI is getting involved. She smiled grimly. Turns out they've been looking for a way to crack this gang for months. You just gave them the break they needed. Marcus joined them, studying the photos. I recognize these 2, he pointed. They were here last week just watching. Didn't think much of it then. He shook his head. Won't make that mistake again. We're already screening suspicious customers, keeping better records. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, streaming them by through the diner's windows. The rain-slicked parking lot gleamed, showing no trace of the previous night's confrontation. But things had changed. In the diner, in the town, in the people who'd witnessed one woman stand up against those who thought their strength gave them power over others. Rachel paused by Emily's booth, coffee pot in hand. You know what the best part is? She said softly. It's not just that you stopped them. It's that you showed us we don't have to be victims. We can be strong too. She straightened her shoulders, proud and determined. Maybe not Force Recon strong, but strong enough. A week after the incident at Joe's Roadhouse diner, the ripple effects of that rainy night continued to spread. Detective Kennedy sat at Emily's usual booth, spreading out an updated case file that detailed the far-reaching impact of the confrontation. The Iron Reapers' carefully constructed criminal enterprise was unraveling thread by thread. We've gotten calls from 12 different establishments across 3 states, the detective explained, pointing to marked locations on a map. All of them reporting similar incidents over the past 6 months. Your story gave them the courage to come forward. She tapped a surveillance photo showing Snake, now known as Jackson Thorne, and his associates. They thought fear would keep their victims quiet. They were wrong. Emily listened intently, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the information. The investigation had revealed a pattern of escalating crimes. Intimidation, extortion, robbery, and worse. The Iron Reapers had been systematically targeting small businesses, particularly those with female employees working late shifts. The FBI's involved now, Kennedy continued, sliding across a federal case summary. They're treating this as an organized crime investigation. That gun they left behind? Ballistics matched it to 2 unsolved robberies in New Jersey. We've got DNA from the coffee cup you threw, surveillance footage, witness statements. She smiled. They're not walking away from this one. Rachel approached the booth, her wrist now free of bandages, though faint bruises remained. Channel 5's here again, she announced, gesturing toward the parking lot where a news van had pulled up. They're doing a follow-up story about the self-defense classes. The young waitress had become something of a spokesperson, encouraging other victims to speak out. The community center had been overwhelmed by the response to Emily's expanded self-defense program. What started as a single class had grown into a comprehensive training series with special sessions for service industry workers. Emily had recruited other veterans to help, creating a curriculum that balanced practical defense with situational awareness. It's not just about physical techniques, Emily explained to a group of waitresses from neighboring diners who'd gathered for advice. It's about awareness, confidence, and knowing when to act. Most importantly, it's about supporting each other. She'd adapted her military training into something civilians could use, emphasizing prevention over confrontation. Marcus had transformed Joe's security protocols, setting an example for other businesses in the area. New cameras covered every angle, panic buttons were installed under counters, and staff communication procedures were overhauled. We're not just protecting our people, he told other restaurant owners who came to learn from his experience. We're sending a message that these criminals can't intimidate us anymore. The truck driver, Jim Cooper, had spread the word through his network. Truckers were now keeping watchful eyes on late-night establishments along their routes, reporting suspicious activity to a tip line Detective Kennedy had established. The criminal organization had lost the advantage of operating in shadows. Got another one, David called out from the kitchen, checking his phone. Diner in Maryland recognized Pete and Doug from the news coverage. They tried to pull the same thing there last month. He'd become the unofficial keeper of case updates, maintaining a digital record of every report and sighting. Kate had organized a support group for service industry workers affected by similar incidents. They met weekly in the diner after closing, sharing stories and strategies. It's not just about what happened here, she explained to Emily. It's about making sure it doesn't happen anywhere else. The bell above the door chimed as 2 FBI agents entered the diner. They'd been interviewing witnesses all week, building a federal case against the Iron Reapers. Their presence highlighted how a single confrontation in a small-town diner had escalated into a multi-state investigation. The organization's leadership is running scared, one agent reported, joining Emily and Detective Kennedy. Their usual tactics don't work when people aren't afraid anymore. We've got members turning on each other trying to make deals. He spread out new surveillance photos showing gang members hastily leaving known hideouts. Rachel brought fresh coffee, lingering to listen. She'd given multiple statements to investigators, her testimony strengthened by her determination to prevent others from experiencing similar threats. I heard from a waitress in Virginia, she shared. They hit her diner last year, but she was too scared to report it. Now she's working with the FBI, too. The local paper had run a series of articles examining the broader impact of organized crime on small businesses. Emily's story had become a catalyst for change, inspiring others to take stands against intimidation. The Iron Reapers had built their power on fear, but that foundation was crumbling. We've identified safe houses in 5 states, Detective Kennedy noted, marking locations on her map. Joint Task Force is coordinating raids. But, honestly, she looked up at Emily. The biggest damage to their organization isn't the arrests or evidence. It's the fact that you showed everyone they're not invincible. Outside, more restaurant owners arrived for a scheduled security consultation. What had started as one Marine veteran protecting one diner had evolved into a community-wide movement for change. The Iron Reapers had thought they'd found an easy target that rainy night. Instead, they'd initiated their own downfall. 1 month after the incident at Joe's Roadhouse diner, Emily stood before a packed community center gymnasium, surrounded by faces both familiar and new. The self-defense program had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, drawing participants from across 3 counties. Tonight was the culmination of the first comprehensive training series, and the energy in the room was electric. "Remember," Emily addressed the group, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that had faced down 3 bikers that rainy night. "This isn't about becoming fighters. It's about being prepared, being aware, and knowing you have the right to feel safe in your workplace." She gestured to Rachel, who stood beside her wearing a new instructor's shirt. The young waitress had discovered a talent for teaching others, her own experience lending authenticity to the lessons. The transformation wasn't limited to the people in the room. Joe's Roadhouse Diner had become a model for business security in the region. Marcus proudly demonstrated their new safety features to visiting restaurant owners: panic buttons, camera systems, staff communication protocols, and, most importantly, a renewed sense of community vigilance. "We've had 0 incidents since implementing these changes," Marcus explained to a group of business owners. "But it's not just about the technology. It's about creating an environment where everyone looks out for each other." The diner's staff now included off-duty law enforcement and veterans who appreciated both the food and the establishment's commitment to safety. Detective Kennedy arrived during the training session, bringing updates on the broader investigation. The Iron Reapers network was collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated. "We've made 37 arrests across 6 states, she announced to the gathered crowd, including Jackson Thorne, and his entire leadership circle. The FBI's task force found their main operations center based on evidence from that night." Kate, who now coordinated the support network for service industry workers, shared stories of other establishments that had fought back against intimidation. "A diner in Ohio stopped an attempted robbery last week," she reported. Their staff had completed this training program. The would-be robbers didn't expect resistance. They fled empty-handed. David's video footage from the incident had become a training tool for law enforcement and business owners alike. "We've had requests from police academies," he mentioned proudly. "They're using it to show how situation awareness and proper training can prevent escalation." The cook had become something of a documentary filmmaker, recording the program's growth and impact. The community center's director approached Emily during a break in the training. "We've received funding to expand the program statewide," she revealed. "Other communities want to implement what you've started here. They're calling it the Roadhouse Protocol, a comprehensive approach to business security and staff empowerment." Jim Cooper, the truck driver who'd witnessed the original incident, had organized a network of truckers who now served as informal guardians of late-night establishments along their routes. "We've always looked out for each other on the road," he explained to the class. "Now we're extending that protection to the places that keep us fed and caffeinated." Rachel demonstrated a wrist release technique to the group, the same move she'd wished she'd known when Snake grabbed her that night. "It's not about being the strongest," she explained, echoing Emily's teachings. "It's about being smart, being prepared, and knowing you're not alone." The bruises on her wrist had faded, but her determination had only grown stronger. Local news crews filmed portions of the training for a special report on community safety initiatives. Emily still avoided the spotlight, but she recognized the importance of spreading the message. The story had evolved beyond one confrontation in a diner. It had become a movement for positive change. "We've had inquiries from women's shelters and advocacy groups," Detective Kennedy shared with Emily after the class. "They see the potential for this program to help other vulnerable populations. Your military experience, combined with Rachel's first-hand account, creates a powerful teaching model." The gymnasium slowly emptied as participants left, many stopping to share their own stories or thank Emily for the training. One young waitress recently hired at Joe's summed up the evening's impact. "I used to be scared working late shifts. Now I feel like I'm part of something bigger, a community that stands together." Marcus had posted a new sign at Joe's entrance, "Protected by Community Shield Program." Similar signs were appearing at diners and restaurants across the state, signaling their participation in the security initiative. The Iron Reaper's former hunting grounds had become a network of safe spaces. As Emily packed up the training equipment, Rachel helped while sharing news about the diner's latest changes. "We're hosting monthly security workshops now," she said. "Other businesses send their staff to train with us. It's like we're building an army of everyday heroes." She paused, looking at Emily thoughtfully. "All because you were in the right place that night." Emily shook her head, smiling slightly. "No. It's because people like you decided to stand up and make changes. I just showed you it was possible." She watched as the last participants left, carrying with them not just new skills, but a renewed sense of confidence and community. The night that had started with 3 bikers threatening a diner had sparked a transformation none of them could have predicted. 3 months after the incident at Joe's Roadhouse diner, Emily Walker sat in the courthouse gallery, watching as Jackson Snake Thorne and his associates faced sentencing. The federal prosecution had built an ironclad case, combining evidence from that rainy night with testimony from dozens of victims who had come forward in its wake. The Iron Reaper's reign of intimidation was ending not with a bang, but with the quiet finality of justice being served. "In light of the evidence presented," the judge announced, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "and considering the extensive pattern of criminal behavior across multiple states, this court sentences Jackson Thorne to 25 years in federal prison." She turned her stern gaze to Pete and Doug, who seemed to shrink in their orange jumpsuits. "As willing participants in these organized criminal activities, you are each sentenced to 18 years. Rachel sat beside Emily, her presence a testament to how far she'd come from being a frightened waitress. She had testified earlier in the trial, her clear, confident voice describing not just the attack, but the positive changes that had emerged from it. The judge had specifically cited her testimony as an example of the community's resilience and transformation. Detective Kennedy joined them after the sentencing, carrying a thick folder of case files. "The FBI's task force has identified over 100 victims across 8 states, she reported. "The Iron Reaper's entire operation has been dismantled. Their assets are being seized, their safe houses raided. More importantly, their reputation for intimidation has been shattered." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered to cover what had become known as the Roadhouse redemption case. The story had captured national attention, highlighting issues of community safety and the importance of standing up to organized intimidation. Emily still avoided interviews, but Rachel had become an eloquent spokesperson for the cause. "The Community Shield program has been implemented in over 50 establishments across 3 states, Rachel told the press, referring to the comprehensive security initiative that had grown from the incident. "We're not just protecting businesses. We're changing the culture of fear that allowed groups like the Iron Reapers to operate." Back at Joe's Roadhouse diner, Marcus had organized a celebration for the verdict. The place was packed with supporters, law enforcement officers, and business owners who had joined the security network. The diner itself had been transformed. New security features blended seamlessly with the familiar, comfortable atmosphere, creating a model of safe, community-oriented business practices. Kate, now the regional coordinator for the Community Shield program, shared updates on their expanding influence. "We've got waiting lists for Emily's training sessions in 12 counties, she announced proudly. "The state legislature is considering making our security protocols mandatory for late-night establishments. They're calling it the Force Recon standard." David's original video footage had become part of law enforcement training programs nationwide. "The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is using it to teach pattern recognition," he explained, showing a letter of commendation he'd received. "They say it's a perfect example of how criminal organizations target vulnerable businesses and how proper training can disrupt their operations." Jim Cooper had expanded his truckers' network into a formal organization called Highway Guardian Program, with members actively monitoring late-night establishments along major routes. "We prevented 3 attempted robberies this month alone," he reported, "just by being visible, being watchful, and letting these criminals know the days of easy targets are over." The community center where Emily taught had received federal funding to expand their security training programs. "We're developing specialized courses for different industries," Emily explained to a group of business owners. "Restaurants, convenience stores, gas stations, anywhere that might be vulnerable to organized intimidation. The principles remain the same: awareness, preparation, community support." Detective Kennedy shared the broader impact of the case on law enforcement strategies. "Other jurisdictions are adopting our approach," she said. "Instead of treating these incidents as isolated crimes, they're looking for patterns, building networks, encouraging community involvement. The Iron Reapers case showed us how powerful an engaged community can be." Rachel had started teaching her own self-defense classes, focusing specifically on service industry workers. "Emily showed us that strength isn't just about physical ability," she told her students. "It's about confidence, awareness, and knowing you're part of something bigger than yourself." Her classes always filled up quickly, her personal experience lending weight to her teachings. The diner's regular customers had embraced their role in the community safety network. They kept watchful eyes on suspicious behavior, supported the staff, and spread the word about the importance of standing together against intimidation. What had started as one woman protecting one diner had evolved into a movement for positive change. As the celebration continued at Joe's, Emily took a moment to observe the transformed environment. The security cameras were unobtrusive but effective, the panic buttons readily accessible, the staff confident and alert. But more importantly, there was a sense of community, of shared purpose that no security system could provide. "You know what the real victory is?" Rachel asked, joining Emily at her usual booth. "It's not just that we put those men in prison. It's that we showed everyone that change is possible, that you don't have to accept being victimized, that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same." Emily nodded, watching as more people arrived to celebrate the verdict. The Iron Reapers had thought they were attacking a vulnerable target that rainy night. Instead, they had inadvertently sparked a transformation that would continue long after their sentences were served. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Joe's Roadhouse Diner hosted a special anniversary gathering. The parking lot was filled to capacity, with vehicles ranging from police cruisers to transport trucks, all belonging to people whose lives had been touched by the events of that rainy night. Inside, the diner hummed with conversation and laughter, its transformation from vulnerable target to community cornerstone complete. Emily Walker sat in her usual corner booth, observing the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The past year had brought changes she could never have predicted when she'd first intervened to protect Rachel from 3 threatening bikers. The Community Shield program she'd helped establish now operated in over 200 locations across multiple states, its success rate speaking for itself. "Remember how scared I was that night?" Rachel asked, sliding into the booth across from Emily. The former waitress now ran her own security consulting firm, helping businesses implement the protective measures that had proven so effective at Joe's. "I never imagined that something so frightening could lead to something so positive." Marcus approached their table, carrying a framed article from the Wall Street Journal. The national newspaper had done a feature on the transformation of small business security practices, using Joe's Roadhouse Diner as their primary example. "They're calling it a revolution in community-based protection," he said proudly, showing them the headline, "From Vulnerability to Victory, How One Diner Changed the Face of Business Security." Detective Kennedy arrived with updates on the broader impact of their case. The Iron Reapers' conviction had triggered a domino effect in organized crime prosecution. "We've seen successful cases against 3 other criminal organizations using the same methods," she reported. "The Roadhouse Protocol is becoming standard procedure for dealing with systematic intimidation operations." Kate, who now coordinated security programs across 6 states, shared the latest statistics. "Incidents of business intimidation are down 70% in areas that have implemented our protocols," she announced. "But more importantly, reporting of incidents has increased. People aren't staying quiet anymore. They're standing up, speaking out, supporting each other." David's documentary about the transformation had earned recognition from law enforcement agencies nationwide. The FBI's training division has requested permission to use it in their academy, he said, still somewhat amazed by the reach of his footage. They say it perfectly illustrates how community engagement can disrupt criminal enterprises. Jim Cooper and his Highway Guardian program had expanded to cover most major trucking routes in the eastern United States. We've got over 5,000 drivers actively participating now, he reported. Every night, hundreds of eyes are watching out for our friends in the service industry. The predators don't stand a chance anymore. The community center's director presented Emily with an award recognizing her contributions to public safety. The plaque would join others in her office, though she remained more proud of her students' successes than any official recognition. The self-defense program had evolved into a comprehensive training system, empowering thousands of workers across multiple industries. Rachel stood to address the gathered crowd, her confidence a far cry from the frightened waitress of a year ago. What happened here wasn't just about stopping 3 criminals, she began. It was about showing us that we have the power to change things, that when we stand together, support each other, refuse to be intimidated, we can transform not just our workplaces, but our communities. The diner itself stood as a testament to that transformation. New security features blended seamlessly with the comfortable atmosphere that had made it a local favorite. The staff moved with confidence, trained and alert but not fearful. Regular customers participated in the watchful community network that had grown from that one incident. Emily finally rose to speak, something she rarely did at public gatherings. A year ago, 3 men thought they found an easy target, she said, her quiet voice carrying in the respectful silence. They thought their strength gave them power over others. They were wrong. Not just about me, but about every person they'd ever tried to intimidate. Real strength isn't about fear or force. It's about standing together, protecting each other, building something positive from something negative. The gathering continued into the evening, with people sharing stories of how the Community Shield program had affected their lives. A waitress from Virginia described stopping an attempted robbery. A store owner from Maryland talked about how his staff's confidence had transformed his business. A truck driver recounted preventing an attack just by being visibly present and watchful. As the celebration wound down, Emily and Rachel stood in the parking lot, looking back at the diner where everything had started. The neon signs glowed warmly in the darkness, welcoming travelers and regulars alike to a place that represented more than just good food and coffee. It stood for community, strength, and positive change. You know what I think about sometimes? Rachel asked softly. Those bikers thought they were so powerful that night. They never imagined they were about to change things for the better, just not in the way they intended. She smiled at her mentor and friend. They thought they found an easy target. Instead, they found a force for change. Emily nodded, watching as more people arrived to join the celebration. The Iron Reapers had wanted to make people afraid that rainy night. Instead, they had inadvertently helped create something powerful, a community united against intimidation, a network of support and protection, a lasting reminder that positive change often comes from unexpected moments of courage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.